Hi, my name's Wade Vernon, and I wrote a UFO book called Force Fields, Alien Visitations to a Planet Living in the Dark. And I'm here to talk to you a little bit about it, specifically some material that is somewhat like the centerpiece of the book that I've referred to as a 1-2 punch. There's two different sections, and they're relevant to a NASA classified video. The reason I titled this video that I'm sharing with you, the disclosure material, NASA UFO Video Archives, is because what I'm about to share with you is some material that is so shocking to some people, but material that leaves no question whatsoever. No question whatsoever that what you're witnessing is an astronaut filming a flying saucer close up. And the thing is, for all the years that UFOs have been studied, there's still people saying, well, you know, are they real? Are they really here? Are they coming? Is it just a bunch of people imagining things? So before I actually go into this material and my experience of viewing this video numerous times, again, a classified video, I want to be upfront about the fact that I have probably met with over 1,000 people, probably more like a couple thousand people, since the time that I published the book. Published it, was available on Amazon in July of 2014, and pretty much interacted with every conceivable type of person, every just cross-section of America and people elsewhere as well from other countries. So I've got a really good feel for how people respond to this material, whether they're comfortable with it or not. And there are definitely some people this material is not for, is not going to be something they're going to be able to handle. So I wanted to be upfront with that and let you know that. Okay, so we're now clear that if this is not for you, you're out of the room now. So before I proceed to explain more and go into more detail about this video, a little bit more about me and my background. I have been a certified hypnotherapist since 1991, 20 plus years. I'm also a licensed body worker, massage therapist. I've been a personal trainer. I no longer do training. I primarily do hypnosis and massage now, aside from freelance writing. And also my BA in psychology, I do believe, has helped me a lot with my research. It's given me a good insight into another angle of the phenomenon. And that is another element about my book, is that I cover pretty much every way that the UFO phenomenon impacts us, meaning psychologically, mentally, spiritually, physically. It hits us on a sociological level, obviously with religion, and obviously it has huge implications about technology and where we may or may not be in regards to the UFO and alien technology. So as far as getting into the topic to begin with, that's probably a question a lot of people would say, well, why would you bother? What would spur you to get into that? In the late 1960s, when I was living in Houston as a kid, there were lots and lots of sightings going on all across the country, all over the world really, but a lot of them in our country, in America. And living in Houston, there were actually a number of people I knew that had had sightings, and I actually had a couple myself as a kid, 11-year-old. One was with a group of people in the Memorial area. I guess there were about 6 of us. A good buddy of mine from 6th grade, his brother, his mom, and his dad. And it was a really unusual object that was darting around in their backyard on the horizon, and basically doing something like 2,000 mile an hour accelerations and then stopping on a dime. So definitely very unconventional. What really, you might say, sealed the deal for me, even though I was already researching UFOs for quite a while. The sighting I had in October of 1968, late night, approximately 12:40 a.m., concerned an object that started off very, very high up and looked like a magnitude 0 star, meaning very bright, sort of a pinpoint of light, perhaps as bright as Jupiter on the brightest night that Jupiter appears. And within probably 10 seconds, while it was zigzagging all over the sky and coming down lower, within 10 seconds it was over the roof of the next door neighbor's house. Originally appeared like a ball of light, and then as it came closer, it resolved itself to where it was a disc, because evidently it was sort of at a different angle to where it looked like a sphere. By the time it had gotten up that close, it had already done these totally bizarre maneuvers, completely silently. It was illuminated brighter than a full moon. It was incredibly bright. Didn't make any sound whatsoever. And again, this is in the memorial area where we lived, and the trees out my bedroom window was like living in a forest, and nothing was moving. No branches, there was no wind, no sound of propulsion. But what was really probably the most shocking thing that quite literally made me go into shock was the object, instead of vectoring like you'd see an airplane going in a perfect line, this thing would disappear at point A, just like wink out, and reappear over here. And I mean, just boom, boom. And I'm talking also so close up that it was, I think at this stage, probably about 30, 40 feet away. And then it came closer and closer, had spinning lights around the perimeter. The flashing lights were incredibly intense, and they were going back and forth, clockwise, counterclockwise. And then, really, the most shocking thing of all is this thing hovering over the neighbor's roof suddenly just dove down at my window, and I blacked out with my eyes wide open. So, having read a number of stories about people using hypnosis and hypnotherapy, that was my original introduction to hypnosis, was to go back and regress to what happened. And I actually went to a hypnotherapist who was a psychologist here in Austin, Texas, and he's still very much alive and well, and he's in the book. He agreed to appear in the book with his real name, and he's read the book. He loved it. We've had some talks about it. But at any rate, going to him as well as another hypnotherapist when I lived in Miami years later, there seemed to be a blockage when the object was close up to where I'm not really sure what happened beyond that. And it just seemed as though what was an understanding was that there was some kind of communication going on, but I didn't know what it was. So bottom line is, really pretty much since that sighting in '68, I've been what you would call a seeker. I've been researching UFOs just almost nonstop. My father was a research scientist, and I always tell people I inherited what I call his query engine mind, just constantly asking questions, just firing them out. So this ongoing trek, if you will, was cross-country, and being a self-employed trainer, massage therapist, and eventually hypnotherapist, allowed me freedom to move around and go to new locales to do more research. And so in the early 90s, 1992, April, I moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and discovered fairly quickly that for whatever reason, I guess you'd call it synchronicity or serendipity, I ended up living within walking distance of what was called the Space Science Center, also known as Santa Fe's UFO Museum. And it was here at this museum that I absolutely blundered into this mind-blowing video. And I'll explain that in a little more detail, but I'll show you a photo first. This is a color shot of the Space Science Center that was taken in the early 1990s. And you can see it looks like kind of a typical adobe structure. You could probably describe it as a adobe casita. It's a small, nondescript structure, and there's a sign out front. And I really didn't know what to think about it. I'd sort of heard a little bit here and there. It was an interesting place. But when I finally did go in there, I met with the owner, Philippe. Actually, his name was Philippe Cabeza de Vaca. And he was a very nice guy, charming, interesting, intelligent. And so he just said, look around, see, what you might be interested in. Because he had just an incredible number of books and a wall of videos and boxes of videos. And I also noticed that he had 4 rows of sort of ramshackle, used movie theater seats. And so I thought, okay, well, so, I asked him, well, so do I rent these videos if I want to watch them, or how do we do this? And he said, no, you don't, there's no charge. He said, I just, look through here, see what you like, and I'll put a video on for you. And as fate would have it, the video title that just jumped out at me on the spine of the VHS box, again, this was, I guess, 1994, maybe like late 93, early 94. On a VHS tape box on the side, it said, NASA UFO Video Archives, Volume 1. Now, if you're a UFO researcher and you see a title like that, that's the one you grab. So I said, yeah, this looks like something I'd like to see. And he sort of grinned and nodded and said, cool. And so, go take a seat. And what I was about to view is material that is just unbelievably clear that this was a classified video. Okay, so cut to, I'm sitting there, he dims the lights, he puts the tape in, turns it on, and the footage that first appeared on the screen, it became clear right away that this was probably a not VHS, but a Super 8 black and white film from the 60s that was transferred onto videotape later. And, I guess semi-official looking, the first thing you see on the screen is the bold print, NASA UFO Video Archive, Volume 1. So, great. And then that fades, and then the first thing you see is a Gemini capsule, a rocket with the Gemini capsule on the top of it at Cape Canaveral, daytime, black and white footage, but it's very clear it's daytime, probably, noonish, fairly bright light. And rather than go into the detail about that, let's just say that there was a flying saucer that came zooming out of nowhere and interacted with the Gemini rocket. And that in itself could take a while to go into, but to me the real meat of this, if you will, is about 2 scenes later. And that is where the first thing you see is what immediately is clear is the LEM, the Lunar Excursion Module. And why it is so clear is because if you studied the vehicles at all in the Apollo program, the LEM looked everyone said it was a buggish looking, looked like a bug, and it had the pair of triangular windows. So what you're seeing here is there's an astronaut in a spacesuit, black and white footage again, clearly inside the LEM. You can see the control panel, very closed quarters, tight compartment, and interestingly also, that really completely authenticates this as being on the surface of the moon is because the astronaut that's moving, obviously one astronaut's filming the other guy. He's moving with great agitation, like urgency, moving fast or struggling in a way. But as he struggles towards one of the windows, you see that it's clear he's got drastically reduced gravity and mass because he's almost floating and his legs are floating up in the air. And again, struggling, grabbing onto a panel and going over to one of the windows. And he's got a camera. It's one of those old 1960s, very, very big video camera. Looks like a great big rectangular box. Puts it up on his shoulder. Obviously, the other guy's filming him doing that. You couldn't see his face. I can't recall if he had his helmet on or not, but you could not tell which astronaut it was. But he goes up to the window and puts it, the big rectangular video camera, right up to the triangular glass. The next thing you see is what I would describe as a pancake-shaped classic flying saucer on the edge of a crater, perhaps 50 yards, possibly closer, to the window of their LEM. And I can demonstrate it this way. when you have a plate on edge, this is very much the shape that it looked like, perhaps a little fatter towards the edge here, the tapered edge, and not a rim up here at the top. But it was glowing a brilliant, brilliant white. And I think the way I describe it in the book is that it was like highly charged plasma, almost like electric fire. Again, black and white footage, but there was this kind of sense of a highly agitated electrical plasma field around it. And as it's hovering, it's doing this number. It's going like they always describe, when I also describe in my book, that sometimes these saucers, when they're hovering, look like a boat that's moored at a dock. So it's just moving like this. It's got all this electrical energy around it. You can see the crater. It's just painfully obvious it's the moon. And over on behind it, on either side, if you're looking at it right now, were what I would almost call escorts. You couldn't really tell what the shapes of them were, but they were glowing brilliant white. They might have been spheres, they might have been discs, but they were on either side of it, kind of hovering in the back, just slightly behind it. And again, it's doing this number. And so I suspect that what happened here, well, I should cut to, there were maybe one or two other scenes, but nothing nearly as shocking as that. So the video stops, Philippe turns the lights back up, and I walk over to him, and obviously he can tell by looking at my face that I'm shocked about what I've just seen. You know, I get sort of slack-jawed, and he just starts laughing, and I say, how in the hell did you get your hands on this video? I would think it would have to be classified. And he said, oh, I'm sure it's classified. And I said, well, okay, so how did this happen? How did you get this? And he sort of chuckled about it, and he said that shortly after he opened his museum, and it was totally his baby. He created it. Nobody else was helping him. I assume some people maybe contributed every now and then. He never asked for donations. But he said that, I guess perhaps a year or two before I'd met him this particular time, that when he was just starting his museum, he mailed out all over the place to scientific organizations and to NASA query letters saying, I've opened the Space Science Center here in Santa Fe, and he said that he had very formal, professional-looking letterhead stationery. And he queried, would you by any chance have any documents, photos, or videos, or clips that you might be willing to share? And so it was not really elaborated on further than that as far as his query, sending these out. And he said that about a month and a half maybe or so later, a month and a half, 2 months later, he gets this manila folder, envelope in the mail with no return address, but a NASA stamp on it, and opens it up, and there it was. No note inside, no explanation, no, we are responding to you. This is probably something you would like to see. But apparently, not too much later after this, he started getting all kinds of threatening phone calls from very, very angry people, all men, who would never identify who they were with, where they were from, but we want that video back, over and over again. And he said he sort of laughed and said, well, I still haven't done it. You know, I haven't given it back. So from there, I think the next stage would be to say that the first thing you would wonder is, well, how in the world can we say that this is real, that this guy we don't even know, Wade, is telling us this? Why should we believe him? Two things. One is, I have it published in here. I paid the Santa Fe, New Mexican newspaper publishing rights for an article, and it was an article regarding the closing of the Space Science Center. And the article was dated Saturday, August 27th, 1994. And it was written by a Zach Van Eyck. So this article goes into great detail about the center and how, when he was interviewed, Felipe I'm going to quote this directly from the article. You can see it in the book, or you can also go to their archives. I think you maybe pay 15, 20 bucks, and you can look up in the Santa Fe, New Mexican archives and find this. But he said, quote, I closed the center, or they say he closed the center for reasons he is not comfortable talking about. And also, quote, he sent an entire room full of materials back to NASA in June that year. Obviously, that was in '94. Just about everything except a classified film, he says, shows footage of UFOs taken by astronauts on NASA missions. And again, this is a direct quote from that article. And I phoned Philippe when I saw this in the newspaper. I was living there still. I lived there for 7 years. And I said, man, what's going on? I mean, because it was so clear when I was there, and I did go multiple times to see it myself, always to see the same video, and to bring friends as well, to try to get more people to see it. And so I get him on the phone. I said, man, what is going on? Why would you close this place down? What's going on? And he was really nervous. He was very evasive. I definitely got the sense that he was not really wanting to talk about anything specific, and just sort of mumbled something about perhaps wanting to get back into farming. But it's really clear to me, because he had told me more than once about these threatening phone calls, he basically got scared out of business. That is what happened. And so other thing as far as the substantiation for what I've just told you here is I have a friend I've had for many years, and she visited me in Santa Fe, and one of the first things I did was say, hey, we've got to go see this, because she was always into UFOs the way I was as far as researching. And so she has made it clear to me, I've even spoke with her a few days ago on the phone, that if the right people come forward, meaning perhaps somebody in the media, or somebody who's not just somebody out in the country picking this article up or watching this video, in other words, she's willing to substantiate it and go into great detail and basically corroborate everything I've said, because she sat there right next to me. And I'll never forget the look on her face twice. You know, one time I looked at her when this object was diving down at the Gemini capsule on Cape Canaveral in broad daylight, and I looked at her again when that great big glowing plasma disk was hovering on the edge of the crater on the moon. And the look in her eyes just said it all. I mean, she was already on the same page as I am. She already knew way back then. We both were really clear about the reality. And that reality now, I'm telling you, is, because of what I'm telling you, there's no question whatsoever that aliens are here, that sightings that are genuine flying saucer, as in not misperceptions or quacks or people making things up. The craft are real, their vehicles are real, they're here. And so again, I'm coming forward with this basically because I think it's time for disclosure. And you know, as I said, I'm calling this disclosure material. So further down the road, that was '94. In 2004, I had moved back to Austin in 1999, and was still doing my independent contractor gigs. And I had an appointment, concierge at one of the high-end hotels here in Austin, phoned me and said, and he knew that I was researching UFOs and writing a book, and he said, you know, I really think you'd be interested in working with this guy. He's with NASA, and he seems like he's a pretty big wheel. And I said, okay, great. And so I go to the hotel. The guy booked a 90-minute session. He was a super cool guy. I actually described in the video, or rather in my book, that when the massage was over, it was clear to me when I was talking to him, he sort of looked like a young Einstein, including the beard and kind of crazy hair. At any rate, because while I was working on him, when he was face down on the table, we were in a hotel suite, and there were tons of symposium folios and laptops and articles and whatnot, and lots of the symposiums had a stamp of NASA on it. So obviously this guy was for real with NASA. And so when I came back in the room after I'd left him alone for a little while after we finished the massage, I started to put my table away, and I said, well, look, obviously you're with NASA. Do you mind if I ask what you do? What's your stance there? What's your background? And I'm going to call him Dr. Jones because I obviously couldn't give his real name with what I'm about to say about him. At any rate, Dr. Jones said he had a doctorate in aerospace engineering and a master's in electrical engineering. And I said, oh, wow, great combo. And so as I was putting everything away, I said, well, look, I've been researching UFOs for years, and I have something I'd kind of like to talk to you about. Do you have a few moments? And he said, sure, I'm not pressed for time, fire away if you got some questions. So I told him all the different elements of my research, my cross-country travels, all the people I've met, the people I've interviewed, all the digging I've done. And then I said, and then what really puts the cherry on top of the whole thing is this NASA UFO Video Archive Volume 1 video that I saw in Santa Fe. And as soon as I said that, it was like just tunnel vision. He was just completely taken in and focused on what I was saying. So when I opened up saying about how the Gemini capsule, the rocket and capsule was launching, it was taking off from the pad that day on Cape Canaveral, and the flying saucer comes zooming down, he interrupts me and finishes my statement describing what happened when that disk interacted with the Gemini capsule. And when he interrupted me like that, I just stopped and I sort of looked at him blankly and I laughed, and I could really tell from the way he was looking at me that he sort of got off on it, that he knew it was going to be, wow, this guy knows exactly what I'm talking about. And so then I said, okay, well, if you're already on board with that, then I guess you are aware of the video footage that I described about the huge plasma glowing saucer hovering over the lunar crater from outside the window of the limb. And he looks at me with just such a casual demeanor and says, interesting, I wasn't aware we had saucer footage on the moon. So fast forward from there, I should also mention that he gave me probably another 5 or 10 minutes, and the things he shared with me are in this book, and we just let her rip as far as the material and the information. And he put it to me this way. He said, you have to understand I have a very high security clearance, so I'm not at liberty to discuss real specifics with you, but we can sort of talk around it. Excuse me. And if you go through the narrative, you'll see what I'm talking about. But point is, what Dr. Jones completely established and solidified for me, beyond any doubt whatsoever, is, well, first of all, we did discuss Roswell, that was a reality, and that multiple alien races are here, and that we are trying to reverse engineer saucers, etc., all the way down the line. And the information he imparted to me on those angles made it so clear that there's been a split, meaning the people who grabbed the Roswell material, alien or aliens, the crashed vehicle, and basically was like grabbing the spoils, and that was used for reverse engineering technology. And it's clear that because of this cover-up that started so many decades ago, that there's been a breakaway, as Richard Dolan, in his excellent books and his lectures, has referred to as the breakaway society. And so essentially what Dr. Jones did for me, before I'd even ever seen any of Richard Dolan's material referring to the breakaway society, is he basically just described it flat out without using that terminology, but it was just so clear that Richard Dolan is just right on target when he says a breakaway civilization or a breakaway society, meaning there's a segment that's hidden away. Some people might call it a shadow government. I refer to it as a shadow government in my book, have access to this super technology, and they're not sharing it. And that goes into a whole bunch of other stuff as far as why. But so essentially, rather than go into greater detail, let me just say this. As far as the way my book is structured, I've written it as though it's a nonfiction novel, but it's all 100% fact. I wrote it that way because my experiences, and there are some very unusual things in here, just lent that format. It was a more workable way to present the material, and it was a more readable format. I describe it as an autobiographical, nonfiction, rite of passage UFO research project. And I have pretty much covered everything across the board in my book, every angle. I've interviewed some fascinating people, and there's some really amazing material with them. I've interviewed Whitley Strieber shortly after Communion came out, and just even some of the quotes he gave me in talking to him were fascinating, and they still are. The late Bud Hopkins, who was really just a wonderful person, and I guess I should say a side note, when I met Bud Hopkins in Santa Fe after he'd given a lecture, he agreed to allow me to be one of his hypnotherapists to send people to who'd had unusual and often traumatic experiences with UFOs. And for a while I was receiving some of the people he was referring to me. But he was just a wonderful guy, and I just felt really honored to have been able to meet him and work with him. I've also interviewed Stanton Friedman, the nuclear physicist, who's really put out some super material. The very famous abductee Travis Walton, who also gave some really wonderful insights in his interview with me, and Linda Moulton Howe. And it would really take too much time to share important quotes from each of them, but I will share one from one of Linda's numerous excellent books. Again, for those who aren't aware of her, it'd be probably pretty unusual if you're into UFOs and you haven't heard of her, but she is a journalist, researcher. She has a master's in communication from Stanford. She has her own website. It's award-winning, Earth Files, and numerous books. She gives lectures all over the place. She has just an unbelievable number of videos on YouTube and also available on her website. And she granted me a phone interview for publication, and she said she would grant me 30 minutes, and it sort of mushroomed into about 2.5 hours. She's really that amazing to talk to, and I do think that interview itself is just phenomenal with some of the things we covered. But the quote I have from one of her books, one of my favorite books of hers, is Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 2, High Strangeness. And this really kind of says it all to me. It's a quote from one of her intelligence sources. She has lots of military intel guys who are willing to share information on the sly, so to speak. They don't give out real identities. And one of them, who was apparently retired, this is a quote from her High Strangeness book, speaking about UFOs and aliens. The alien technology is so advanced and the beings are so strange that no one would believe it. Keeping the public and media away from what's really happening isn't difficult. It's a story no one wants to tell, that no one knows how to tell. The truth is stranger than fiction. And that really sort of dovetails to me with one of the concepts that I present in my book, and that is how naive it is of us to presume that we would be alone. Partly, if you just get it, that there's a significant number of stars just in our galaxy, never mind the other hundreds of billions of galaxies, and that's just in what we know as the universe. If there's a multiverse, it just makes it that much larger. And then if you factor in multiple dimensions, it's sort of mind-boggling. But point being, there's a significant number of stars in our galaxy that are more than 1 billion years older than our sun Sol. So if you allow yourself the indulgence of presuming that maybe a civilization has survived the life of its star, we could potentially be dealing with technologies that are more than 1 billion years advanced than ours. So that's something to kind of try to wrap your mind around. And that sort of also brings to mind a quote early on in my book. It's one of my favorites from classic sci-fi late author Arthur C. Clarke. This is really one of my favorites ever. He said, a sufficiently advanced technology would appear indistinguishable from magic. So to wrap up the whole idea of trying to push for disclosure here, which is what I'm really doing here, because you can track down and establish, yes, in fact, this video was at the Space Science Center. The Space Science Center really did exist. And if that isn't enough for you, I have a lady friend, very sharp, very intelligent, who visited me, who can corroborate everything I've just told you about these videos. Since what I'm attempting to do is push NASA and our government officials to disclose, just remember you can dig up all this information that I've relayed to you on the Santa Fe, New Mexican newspaper archives online, and pay a fee, or you can just get a copy of my book. It's all in my book. And confirm for yourself that yes, the Space Science Center really did exist, that this NASA classified video really existed, and also it seems from talking to Philippe that what may have happened is somebody at NASA either screwed up completely when they sent this video out, or somebody actually wanted to leak out a little bit of information, just a little bit. So who can say, but there's no question that there was definitely some faction that was very, very upset and wanted the video back. Whether or not Philippe ever actually gave it back to them, I have no clue. I lost track of him after he closed his place down. And if this information is not sufficient for you, then I do have a very intelligent, very well-educated, very sharp lady friend who was with me when she visited Santa Fe, and she could corroborate everything I've just told you. And one side note about the footage on the moon, it seems to me there's a good possibility that that was Neil Armstrong. Part of the reason I say that is the astronaut, whichever one it was, and I do think it was Neil, was clearly very agitated and in a big, big hurry to get to the window. And I'm not saying that's the reason to prove that it was Neil Armstrong, but it seems that it would make more sense that was the first landing mission, the first time a man was about to step on the moon, and therefore to be confronted this way, it was all new. That's the point. And in fact, there are numerous books, which I quote in my book, that allude to supposed overheard conversations at parties, or perhaps just one in particular, in which someone claims to have heard Neil Armstrong relate to someone he was standing by, something to the effect that their ships were huge and very menacing, and there was no question that we had to leave, we couldn't stay. That we, essentially he was relaying the concept that we were banished from the moon. They had a base there, they didn't want us there. And that actually kind of was what I got from looking at the video of this huge disk and these escort ships behind it, that there was a sense of drawing a line in the sand. This is ours, and if you think you're going to stick around, guess again, this is the kind of technology we have. You're not welcome here. There was definitely not a sense of a welcoming committee visiting, or rather meeting them on the moon. Definitely not a welcome. So I have my email address in the front of my book, and it's not unusual for me to receive emails from my readers, generally after they finish reading the book. One of them was a man in Texas. I won't say specifically, but I'll just call him Jeff. And Jeff started emailing me probably around the midpoint of reading my book. He was really enjoying it. And just every maybe week or 10 days, he'd say, hey, I'm at this part, hey, I'm at this part. And he was telling me, finally, when he finished reading it, that his wife had been asking him all along, so what's happening now? So what part are you at now? So tell me what else is going on in the book. So by the time he got to the end of the book, apparently his wife said to him, what right does this guy have, meaning me, the author, what right does he have to publish this information, to come forward and talk about this classified material? And she asked him, Jeff, is he trying to overthrow the government? Is that what he wants? And when Jeff shared that with me on the phone, I said, well, I guess maybe you don't recall, but there's a part of my book where I say one of my primary driving desires to get this out there is, and maybe it's extraordinarily idealistic of me, but if the technology behind these vehicles, and there's obviously an enormous amount of super technology that the Breakaway Society possesses, if that were shared with the whole planet, we could do away with everything that's wrong, everything that's painful and negative and dark. We could do away with the pain, suffering, war, strife, bloodshed, and basically turn the planet back into a virtual Eden if this information and technology were shared. So, to close this and summarize, I submit to everybody who's watching this, it's my belief that it's time for the top officials, the president, or really all the living presidents, and particularly those and the officials at NASA, it's time to come forward and admit that these things are real, that we are being visited, we have been visited for quite some time, that some of these things that people are seeing are alien vehicles, and some of them probably are ours too. That's definitely one of my firm beliefs, that we have succeeded in reverse engineering. And I would just say, prove me wrong. Tell me that I've made this up, because I know I haven't. And so that, again, for me, is what makes this the disclosure material. So I'm sending that out to the current president, past presidents that are alive, NASA officials. Come clean, because for me the bottom line is you can't deny it anymore. And the fact is, we're not all just different nationalities. We're all Earthlings. We are all citizens of Earth, not just our own countries. So the real question here is, that I'm asking is, isn't it time for the human race to graduate beyond the level of romper room and having a romper room understanding of our world and our universe and our place in it? So I've given a lot of people a lot to think about, and looking forward to seeing what the next step is here. So thank you for your time. That's it.